This is the 2024 Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons, and these are Lego bricks. I'm going to build everything in this out of these. But before I do that, we need to talk about two very important things: the scope of the project and the scale at which I'll be building. We'll start with the scale. At first glance, the obvious solution would be to use the standard D&D scale, this being 1 inch equaling 5 feet, or a 1 to 60. This scale works perfectly for the standard D&D maps. However, the issue arises when you substitute Lego. Using this scale, 5 feet is equal to roughly 3 1/6 studs, rounded down to 3 studs. This may not seem like a problem at first, especially when you consider that according to this scale, Lego minifigures are roughly 6 foot 3 inches tall, close enough to reality to pass. However, this also means that the same minifigure is now over 4.5 feet wide, which is not accurate. Even with the issue of the width, I still considered keeping the scale, but I eventually determined that the width was actually more important than the height, given that D&D is a top-down game. With this scale, the characters would be far too cramped together, doors and passages would be too small to move your figures through, and a lot of detail would be lost. So I decided to move on. After throwing away the base D&D scale, I took a look at standard Lego minifigure scale. Even with my love of Lego, I didn't know what standard minifigure scale was off the top of my head. And looking it up, there seems to be a large range, with the most common answer being 1 to 42. If we chose 1 to 42 for the scale, the standard minifigures would be roughly 5.5 feet tall by 3 foot 4 inches wide. Both of these measurements are still slightly off, but it's close enough for what we're going to be doing with it. Until you realize that 1 square in-game, or 5 feet by 5 feet, is equal to roughly 4.5 studs by 4.5 studs. And honestly, building with half studs is a pain. However, if we slightly change the scale from 1 to 42 to 1 to 38, we get the standard 5 foot square in-game being equal to 5 studs by 5 studs, or 1 stud being equal to 1 foot. I think this will simplify the building process and keep the minifigures at roughly the correct scale. Now that we have the scale settled, we need to talk about the scope of the project. The new monster manual contains over 500 monsters for me to build. Or does it? There are a few restrictions. The first of which is that there really aren't 500 different monsters. Several of the monsters in this book are actually variants of the same creature, the only difference being the skill set, difficulty, and maybe the equipment it's carrying or wearing. The second restriction is that of humanoids, and there are a lot in this book. Like honestly, flipping through this book, I feel like every other page contains a medium-sized biped that will most likely need to be made out of minifigure parts and a couple accessories. And while this is doable, I really don't feel like these types of builds would fit the theme I'm going for with this series. Obviously, if people really feel strongly that I include them, I will, but if not, I'll probably leave them out. The final restriction won't come up as often as the other two, but it's the problem of tiny-sized creatures. These simply won't translate well to Lego. The detail won't be there due to the piece size restriction, and even if I do find pieces that look correct, there really won't be much content for a video. The good news is that even with these restrictions, there are hundreds of monsters left for me to build. So many so that I don't know where to start, which is where you come in. Let me know in the comments which monster you want to see brought to life in Lego first. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for more Lego monsters.